wants to fight fire with fire.
You're listening to The Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing, with your host, Ray Koch.
Hello and welcome. This is The Squared Circle on mavradio.fm. I'm your host, Ray Koch. However you're listening, wherever you're listening, thank you. Now, I've been a boxing fan my entire life. It was ingrained in me with my dad, who was also a big boxing fan. We'd watch fights every Saturday. We actually had HBO for free and weren't supposed to, so instead of having to pay for all of the pay-per-view fights, we actually got to watch them for free, and that's kind of what we did every Saturday. So it was ingrained in me as a kid. I grew up with a lot of the greats, Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, Arturo Gatti. I got to watch a lot of good old 2000 fighters when I was young that really influenced me and established my love for boxing. I actually also trained in boxing for 6 years. I tried to do it earlier, but my mom wouldn't let me. She never really got my love for the sport, and so she wouldn't let me compete. But I trained for 6 years, and then once I moved out of the house, I started boxing pretty much full time while going to school. That was really when I started sparring and started training. I got to train alongside Bud Crawford a couple times while he was still up and coming and in the gym with him. Just learned a lot from him and really just established my love for the sport. It's a combat sport. I don't think that there's anything more manly than two men going at it and really beating each other's faces in, but it's also a sport of respect, and that's something that really I learned to love. I loved how physically demanding of a sport it was, but even more so than the physicalness that we often associate with boxing, for me it was a mental thing, and it was a mental battle all the time, getting yourself in the gym, pushing yourself to ends you never thought were possible in training. And I also just love the respect between two people who really might hate each other before the fight, and then you usually see after the fight it's all love and all appreciation, because you know what the other person went to put themselves in that great shape and that peak performance. So I've been a boxing fan my entire life. I've been in the gym as well, but I've also covered some fights. I've covered pretty much all of Terrence Bud Crawford's fights, who's obviously from Omaha, and he's really popular in the city, but he's also a world champion, two-weight world champion, and one of the greatest fighters to this day, and possibly one of the greatest fighters ever. So I've gotten the chance to really get to know him, talk to him a lot, and cover some of his fights, and it's just been something that I just have fallen in love with more than almost any other sport, and it's something that I really have a passion for. So I hope you enjoy the Squared Circle podcast. For avid boxing fans, I really hope you can relate to some of the analysis that I use, and for novice fans, I hope that you can learn a new appreciation for a sport you may not be that familiar with, and really sit yourself down, maybe watch a couple of the fights we're going to talk about, and maybe you'll develop an adoration for the sport just like I did. Now, we got a packed slate today. We just had Gervonta Tank Davis fight this past weekend. We're going to recap some recent fights, break down some future bouts, talk divisions, and we're going to give a pound-for-pound list for right now. So let's get right into it. Now, the first fight we're going to talk about is Manny Pacquiao versus Adrian Broner. This fight took place 3 weekends ago. A fight a lot of people were really excited about. I wasn't one of them, straight up. Wasn't too excited for this fight. I've seen all I need to see from Adrian Broner in past fights. He lost to Mikey Garcia, Marcos Maidana a couple years ago, which I think ended his career, and Sean Porter as well. All three big names in the 147-pound division now. Maidana's retired now, but Porter has a belt, and Garcia is obviously coming up to fight Errol Spence. Now, for those who don't know, Adrian Broner was another one of Floyd's prodigies, a TMT guy, and a couple years ago, he was Floyd's boy. He wanted to be Floyd. He thought he was Floyd, and it got to his head because people don't realize there's only one Floyd Mayweather. Everyone's trying to become the next Floyd Mayweather. That's not going to happen. Floyd is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of fighter. But we saw him fight Manny Pacquiao a couple weekends ago. Pacquiao was 41 years old. Really old dude to keep fighting. A lot of people thought his career was over when he fought Joe Horn. He came back and he beat Lucas Matisse in a fight he looked really good in. But the Filipino slugger is not the same fighter he was 10 years ago, and I think everyone knows that. But the way he beat Matisse, people were starting to wonder if he could change the way he fights to still be successful later on because he's still got quick hands. I mean, he's one of the greatest fighters of all time for sure. But for him to come back and be a force to reckon with, so to say, in this 147-pound division, like he wants to be, like he says he is still, he's going to have to change his fighting style, be more defensive, pick his spots, and have a lot better defense. Because when he comes in and when he lunges in, he has his hands down. He will throw 8 punches in about 2 seconds, and it's pretty fun to watch. But they're not real technical. They're not real strong. They don't hurt people like they used to. So it was interesting. I watched this fight, not because I was excited, because like I said, I wasn't. I knew Pacquiao would win. I knew Adrian Broner wouldn't let his hands go, and that's exactly what happened. Pacquiao won in unanimous decision, all 12 rounds, and he probably won 10 or 11 rounds. Adrian Broner throws 8 punches a round. Are you kidding me? I don't want to see that. I don't want to see him ever fight again. 8 punches a round? You're never going to win a fight doing that. And the sad thing was there were a lot of experts that picked Broner to win, probably because he's 29 years old and Pacquiao's 41. Broner is the Broner we always know. He's not about boxing. He's about billions. He's about making money. He's about trying to self-promote himself so that he can get people to buy his fights and take that money and blow it on drugs and women and gambling. And he's not about fighting. To give you a little indication of who Adrian Broner is, just listen to what he had to say after the Manny Pacquiao fight. Take a listen.
Adrian?
Yeah, bring your ass over here. I got a lot to say.
We're going to conduct this professionally or we're not going to have an interview. You make the decision. What did you think about the fight?
I beat him. Everybody out there know I beat him. Everybody out there know I beat him. I controlled the fight. He was missing. I hit him clean more times. I beat him.
You averaged 8 punches. Less than 8 punches was the most punches that you had in the round, and it seemed as though you couldn't get close enough.
It already sounded like you was against me. So I already ain't got a fair shake talking to you. But let me talk something. Let me let y'all know. I want to thank the whole hood who came out here. I love y'all. I did this for the hood. Y'all know I beat that boy. Y'all know I beat that boy. What they trying to do is they trying to get that money again with Pacquiao and Floyd. But it's cool. I ain't worrying about it. I'm still that and I'm on top. Cincinnati, stand up. West Side, 2-5.
You're 3-3-1 in your last 7 fights. What will you do next?
Hey, I'm 3-3-1 my last 7, but I'll be 7-0 against you.
Well, that wouldn't mean much. That's the end of this interview.
Now, my favorite part of that interview is when Jim Gray, who's a legendary boxing announcer and interviews fighters all the time after fights, when Broner says, I won that fight, everyone knows I won that fight, and Jim Gray goes, you threw 8 punches around. That just cracks me up every time. But as far as Broner, I don't respect him at all because he takes away what boxing should be. Now, Pacquiao destroyed him, hurt him a couple times, never knocked him down, but Pacquiao didn't look great either, and that's not to take away from him winning that fight. I mean, he beat up a 29-year-old at 41, professional boxer. Like, that's impressive. But I wasn't excited for this fight. It was exactly what I thought it would be. But the next fight we're going to talk about is something where what we talked about with Pacquiao, changing his fighting style as he gets older, is something that actually did happen. And that happened in Sergey Kovalev and an Eldir Alvarez bout that took place 2 weekends ago. Now, the first fight, this was a rematch of the first fight. The first fight, Sergey Kovalev, is a bully. He's a Russian. He's an animal. He's famous for 2 fights with Andre Ward, where he knocked Andre Ward down once and had a draw and then ended up losing to Ward. But Ward's an undefeated fighter, one of the best pound-for-pound fighters of all time. He's probably not in anyone's top 10 list because he just didn't fight in a great era like a lot of others did. But a student of the game, he was ahead of his class, just a great fighter. A lot like Floyd, he learned a lot. He was so smart in the ring, so technical, had good power, but just amazing defense. He was just amazing. And Kovalev really was his toughest fight ever. And so people gained a lot of respect for Kovalev. And Kovalev's a bully. He's always been there. He's 35 years old now, I believe, and in the light heavyweight division. And the first fight with Eldir Alvarez was Alvarez took the fight on a couple weeks' notice because someone else dropped out. And Alvarez has actually been a mandatory for the belt since 2015, but people have been ducking him and finding ways around it so that they didn't have to fight him because he's a big, strong, heavy-handed guy, and if he hits you, There's a good chance he'd go down, and that's exactly what we saw in the first fight between Kovalev and Alvarez. Kovalev won the first, probably 6 of the first 8 rounds, and then in round 8 you saw Alvarez tag him once, tag him good, dropped Kovalev. Kovalev got up, wasn't there, and Alvarez finished it and knocked him out. And so Alvarez took that belt. So we had a rematch here, and a lot of people were really wanting to know if Kovalev could bounce back from that. A lot of times you see that champions that go on huge winning streaks and get knocked out, they're never the same fighter again. So a lot of people were taking Alvarez. I was honestly taking Alvarez. I thought Alvarez would kind of use this to his advantage and that it'd usher in a new era. I thought Kovalev might be done. But Kovalev didn't let that happen. He got a new trainer. He made a lot of excuses for why the first fight happened, and a lot of boxing fans, and myself too, didn't agree with that. Like, a lot of people like to see, if you lose, you say you lost, fair and square. You get knocked out, you say, I got knocked out. He was better tonight. I'll be better in the future. Kovalev made a lot of excuses for training camp, said that he trained too hard, sparred too much, and it wore him out. So he said he made a lot of changes in this training camp, and you're going to see a whole new Kovalev. Everyone's like, oh, yeah. He was right. We were all wrong. Because for 12 rounds, Kovalev looked like a young boxer who threw hard but quick punches, and didn't really let Alvarez ever get on top of him or maul him. Alvarez did land a couple shots throughout the fight, but nothing really too hard that would ever phase Kovalev. I mean, Kovalev danced around him, used his jab, would come at him with a straight right hand. His straight right hand was there all night, and he would use it, but he would get in there, hit him with a couple good shots, and get out. Never stayed in the line of fire too long, and so it was a really good performance by Kovalev, and something that I said I want to see Pacquiao do more of. I thought Pacquiao would be the one that would be able to do that, show better defense, keep his hands up, especially in those melees and those exchanges. But Kovalev looks like a brand new guy, and a guy that looks to be reckoned with in the 175-pound division. And that's saying a lot because there's a lot of young guys, and he's a Russian. There's a lot of Russian, Ukraine. Bivol is one of them that he might fight that has a belt. And these guys are young and very strong and really, really, really good fighters that could end Kovalev's career if he's not careful. And so he said he wants to fight them. I think he will fight them. But it's something that I didn't think Kovalev would bounce back from. Got to give him a lot of credit for doing so. Hell of a fighter. Now, the next fight we're talking about took place 3 weekends ago, I want to say. These were all back to back. Yes, I think this was 3 weekends ago. It's Keith Thurman, Josito Lopez. Now, if you're a boxing fan and you're saying, well, I've heard of Keith Thurman, but I've never heard of Josito Lopez, don't feel bad because that's the way it was supposed to be. Now, Keith Thurman, he was the king of the 147-pound division, which is the best weight class in boxing right now, bar none. He had 2 belts there. He beat Sean Porter to get one. He beat Danny Garcia to get another. So he had 2 belts in boxing, and it was setting up for a fight with Spence to unify all the belts. And Errol Spence Jr. is a young guy. He has the IBF title right now. And then Thurman announced that he had to have shoulder surgery, and he took 2 years out of the ring. This is his first fight back. He's fighting Josito Lopez. It's a tune-up fight, no doubt. Something that everyone thought Thurman would just blow him out of the water, probably knock him out, if not just maul him the whole time. And it didn't turn out to be that way. Thurman didn't look too good. It was a decently close fight. Thurman did end up taking the fight by unanimous decision in 12 rounds. But Josito Lopez kind of tagged him up a little bit, kind of rearranged his face in round 8 and 9 for sure, and showed a weakness in Thurman, and that Thurman's defense maybe wasn't what it was supposed to be. His feet weren't under him, and he didn't have the endurance that he thought he would coming back. But that's to be expected. You know, I had to take a step back after this fight and say, okay, Thurman took 2 years off. He's not going to be the same fighter he was right now as he was 2 years ago, first time fighting in 2 years. So it was interesting because Thurman's a guy I really like, and I thought that if he would have fought Spence 2 years ago, I think he beat Spence. But that's my opinion. A lot of people thought differently. But Thurman's a dog and has a lot, can hit you with a lot of different things. He has a really good right hand, good looping right, good quick left hook. He's got great defense. He goes to the body well. He's just he can fight on the inside. He can fight on the outside. He can fight on his back foot. He can fight pressuring you. But you saw a lot of different things from Thurman 2 years ago because Sean Porter's a bully and a guy who wants to make it a street fight. He's a decent boxer, but he wants to make it a street fight and bully you around kind of like Mike Tyson did. And Thurman fought his fight because when you fight Sean Porter, you have to fight his fight. He won't give you another option. You can't really box him because you couldn't box Mike Tyson for 12 rounds. He would come at you always with great head movement and get inside every time. So for Thurman to fight Sean Porter's fight 2 years ago and beat a brawler by brawling him, and beat him convincingly. Nobody really thought Porter won that fight. That was impressive to me. Then you fight a guy like Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia is really technical. He's a Golden Gloves dude. He's a boxer through and through. He's got really good power, a pretty good left hook that Thurman made fun of because it is a little loopy. It's a little long, but he has some pretty good knockouts with it too. So when Thurman fought him, he boxed and he outboxed him all night long. Wasn't really a close fight. But it was a good fight nonetheless. I mean, both guys landed shots, but Thurman definitely got the better of Garcia that night to get him 2 belts. So taking 2 years off out of the ring, I think a lot of people, including myself, had high expectations for Thurman against a guy we haven't really heard of in Josito Lopez. And Thurman didn't really produce like we thought he would. And that's something that might be something. He might never be the fighter he was. Again, I mean, you see that a lot with injuries, and that can happen. But Thurman was saying that after a tune-up fight, he was ready to get back and fight the dogs, fight Spence, fight Porter, who has a belt now. Took one of Thurman's belts because he had to relinquish it when he was injured. So we'll see, but I don't think Thurman's ready. I think Thurman knows he's not ready. And after the fight, he actually called out Manny Pacquiao, which I think is a brilliant move by him because it's a big fight because of Manny Pacquiao's name. Just because of how big Manny Pacquiao is. But he knows that Manny Pacquiao's 41 years old and that he could beat him. And he would beat him. And if he's improves on what we saw in this first fight and comes back to looking a little more like himself, he'll absolutely demolish Manny Pacquiao. Could end his career because Thurman is longer, bigger, faster, and stronger. All bad combinations for a 41-year-old who's still fighting. A 41-year-old legend, nonetheless. So that's a great fight for Thurman. It's not a great fight in general because I think Thurman will win. We're not going to see the Pacquiao we want to see. And I don't really want to see one of my favorite fighters ever take a bad fight. I kind of wish Pacquiao would just hang him up. But Pacquiao refuses to hang him up because he knows that if he ends his career, his legacy hinges on him being the second best fighter in his generation and number one being Floyd Mayweather. Now, he fought Floyd, lost, blamed shoulder surgery on it, labrum, said he tore his labrum before the fight. Whether that's true or not, he didn't look like himself, but it also wasn't the fight that wasn't when we wanted to see that fight. We should have saw that fight 10 years ago and we saw it 5 years ago. So they were both out of their primes already, and Floyd's a smarter fighter. I would have liked to see Pacquiao fight him 10 years ago when I don't think Floyd could have kept him off of him. But that's what Pacquiao wants. He's staying in the ring because he wants to lure Floyd Mayweather back into the ring so that they can fight again and so that Pacquiao can win so that he can end his legacy with being arguably the best fighter in his generation. And that's why Pacquiao's still fighting. He called Floyd out after the Broner fight. Floyd didn't have much to say. But if there's one thing we've learned, it's that if the money's right, Floyd will always show up and make an appearance. Floyd fought a guy in Japan who was a kickboxer for some money that people wanted to see. Nobody in America really bought the fight, but a lot of people in Japan did. They want to see Floyd. Thought he was a celebrity, and he is a celebrity, but they thought he was a god there. He knocked him out in 1 round. So Floyd stays in shape. A Floyd comeback is not out of the question. It's not crazy to think. If the money was right, Floyd would take that fight. So if Pacquiao doesn't get that fight, he wants to fight the best. That's how boxers are. That's how they're ingrained. They're crazy in the head in a good way. I mean that with all due respect, but Pacquiao wants to fight the best. And if he can't fight Floyd, he wants to keep fighting legends that are current and belt holders so that he can rewrite that legacy, because I know it kills him and it kills me that he's not the number 1 fighter of our generation, because Floyd Mayweather is. And it's tough that he had to fight the same time as Floyd did, and it's tough that they had so many issues with fighting 10 years ago with drug tests and one of them ducking another, and that when they fought they were out of their primes. And if Floyd fights out of his prime, he's still going to be able to have his defense, which is the best part of his game. He's not going to let you hit him. His defense is still just as good as it was. He just doesn't have the power he used to. Now, Pacquiao was slower, older, and so Floyd's going to win that fight all day long, because out of their primes, Floyd's a better fighter. In their primes, I think it's so hard to pick against Floyd Mayweather. But if they fought 10 years ago, I think that it's a lot tougher for Floyd to keep Manny Pacquiao off of him, and I think there's a good chance Pacquiao could get him up against the ropes and tag him a lot and be a fight that Floyd never has seen. Would have loved to see it. All right, the only fight we're going to talk about that has not been in 2019 is worth it because it came in very end stages of 2018, and that's Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. A heavyweight bout for 2 belts. It was a really good fight, really good build-up. America needs more heavyweight championship boxing fights. I mean, think back to Ali Frazier, Foreman Ali, Lewis and Holyfield, Tyson Holyfield, Tyson. I mean, that is what brings more boxing fans into it. They want to see the heavyweights go at it. They want to see knockouts. And this was a fight for a chance to get a lot of people who are maybe on the edge of being boxing fans or think that boxing is done and are watching the UFC to get back into it. So it was a really good opportunity. And 2 undefeated fighters, 2 great fighters. Deontay Wilder's listen to this. I got to pause when I say this because this is so impressive. You don't see this. Deontay Wilder is 40-0 with 39 knockouts. Wow. You'd think, oh, that's the greatest fighter ever. And then you watch him fight and you're like, oh, this guy? This guy throws like, he punches like he's never boxed in his life. His punches are wild, unorthodox. Yeah, he punches with open hands sometimes. It's like I don't know how he doesn't break his hand every single fight. But he's 40-0, 39 KOs. Now, he was fighting Tyson Fury. He's knocked everyone out coming into this. Tyson Fury's 27-0, but he hadn't fought since 2015. Now, that little caveat's important because in 2015, he beat Vladimir Klitschko. And the Klitschko brothers, Vitaly, Vladimir, ran heavyweight boxing post-Lennox Lewis. So after about 2004, 2005, the Klitschko brothers ran the heavyweight division. They never fought each other, and who could blame them? I wouldn't fight my brother. But they both were just immensely better than everyone else in the heavyweight division. They had some losses here and there, but the cool thing was that if Vitaly lost to someone, Vladimir would beat that guy up. And if Vladimir lost to someone, Vitaly would be that guy's next fight, and he would knock him out every single time. It was really cool. So it was interesting. But Fury, 27-0, is a Brit, and he fought Klitschko in 2015 when Klitschko was on top of the game. I think he had like 12 straight title defenses, something crazy. And he ended up beating him, boxed him the whole time. Fury's 280 pounds, 6'9", and dances like a ballerina. It's incredible how quick he is on his feet, how good of a boxer he is. We've never seen a heavyweight that can move like him since Ali. And when they fought, everyone was picking Klitschko. Fury never let Klitschko touch him. Fury's hands were too quick. He boxed him the whole time and won that fight in the unanimous decision. It was impressive, and everyone's like, Fury is the best. Fury is the best right now and is going to run this heavyweight division for as long as he's there. Well, after the fight, Fury got a little into partying, ended up having some cocaine issues, ended up having some depression, mental health, and suicidal thoughts issues. And he took 3 years out of the ring because he couldn't fight, because he was so depressed and so suicidal, and everyone just thought he was crazy. You saw what you kind of saw with Duran and Leonard in the first fight. Think back to Roberto Duran, my favorite boxer of all time, when he beat Sugar Ray Leonard the first time. After that fight, it was his all-glory moment. He went back home and he ate and he partied, and there was nothing left to do. I mean, he'd already done it all by beating the best. And it's like, why keep fighting? And it's interesting because, like, what else is there to do? Fury beat Klitschko. He'll never have a bigger win, you'd think at the time. Now there's, I'm not going to say there's bigger wins out there now, but there's what would be the equivalent in this generation to equal wins. But you saw it with Duran. I mean, he got fat. He partied way too hard. He didn't have the same motivation. And the second time that Leonard and Duran fought, it wasn't even close, because all that motivation was there for Leonard, and none of it was there for Duran. So that's exactly what happened to Fury. But he decides to come back because he thought he could beat the heavyweights. He was ready. He didn't like Deontay Wilder's style because he's not a boxer. Straight up, he's not a boxer. He's just a street fighter that nobody can beat. He's 6'7", Wilder is. And so for a lot of people, that height was the problem, but not for Fury because he's 2 inches taller. So setting up that fight, 2 undefeated guys, everyone was really excited for it. There's another guy into that division who's just as good, if not better, and he is better, I'll say it. I got no problem saying it, and that's Anthony Joshua. He's another Brit. But him and Wilder couldn't come to terms for a fight on contract issues. One of them saying the other person ducked, blah, blah, blah. Same story, different day. So Fury and Wilder agreed to fight. And when it finally happened, Fury said he was going to outbox him 12 rounds. Stay away from that mean right hand, that looping right that you can see coming from a mile away, but if it hits you, you're gone. Anybody, gone. And Wilder said he was going to do what he did with everyone. And that's just knock him out. Well, for the first 6-7 rounds, it was an embarrassment. Fury just did exactly what he did with Klitschko. Hit and don't get hit, pick his spots, counter him well, tag him a couple times, quick punches, never really hurt him, never knocked him down, but just move, dance, and box. It was beautiful. It was poetry in motion. It's a sweet science. That's why we call it. And then in round 8, Wilder ended up tagging Fury with a left hand, which is impressive because Fury only has a right hand. So Wilder, learned that punch wasn't going to work and had to dig deep into his arsenal and box, not just fight, to be able to beat or knock down Fury. Knocked him down. Fury got right up. He won the rest of the round. And he also won the next round, and the next round after that. So we're going into the 12th round now. I had it 9 rounds to 2. I think most people did. Going into the 12th round, all Fury needs to do is not get knocked out. If the fight ends and he's on his feet, everyone's like, all right, he won. He did great. So in the 12th round, the 12th round starts, Fury ends up a minute in getting absolutely clobbered, just tattooed with a right hand from hell by Wilder. He looks like he's out cold. He falls flat. Wilder gets up on the ropes. He thinks it's over. He thinks he did it again. Everyone's like, wow. He just got his ass beat. for 12 rounds and then did what he does to everyone and knocks him out. Well, the ref goes over. He's still doing his 10 count because he's doing his protocol. Fury gets up at 8. He basically opens his eyes when the 10 count's at 8. Jumps up and gets up. Everyone's like, what? He survived that? How? And go back for me. Look at that punch. And you're just going to be like, yeah, I'd be dead. I don't know how his head's still attached to his neck. That's exactly what I was thinking. So Fury gets up. Wilder knocks him down again. Fury wasn't there. Nobody's going to be 100% there after that punch. Knocks him down again. Fury gets up again. Ends up finishing the fight. Everyone's kind of just on the edge of their seat like, I'm not exactly 100% sure what just happened there. That was insane. But at the same time, you're like, wow, okay, 2 knockdowns. It's a 10-7 round in the books. You're like, wow, Fury still won the fight. Wow. Respect to both guys because Wilder learned and adjusted how to hit Fury, but Fury also took away the beast, David versus Goliath, and did exactly what he said he was going to do. He boxed him the whole time, and so everyone's thinking, all right, Fury wins. They go to the scorecards. It's a draw. A draw. Are you kidding me? Now, this is the ugly side of boxing. I'm not saying that this is the case, but this is probably the case. They know that a fight with Anthony Joshua is not going to happen anytime soon. These are the 2 biggest names. They want a rematch. A draw sets up an immediate rematch so that either of them can dethrone the other and so that we can see this whole spectacle again. And I'm not mad because I do want to see it again, but I'm mad because you took away a win from Fury that he deserved, and that's not okay. Everyone knows Fury won. Look at the scorecards. Go look at actual boxing analysts round by round, and everyone had Fury winning. So they call it a draw. These guys are going to fight again. It looks like it's happening in mid to late, probably around September in 2019. So I'm excited for that. I think that this time around, Fury will actually win more convincingly. Fury still was shaking off some rust there, and he's definitely back now in his prime form. So I think Fury wins this convincingly. I don't think Wilder will knock him out. I don't think Wilder can learn what Fury can learn in this next fight. I don't think Wilder can change his fighting style to become a boxer and beat Fury as much as I think that Fury can learn and see what Wilder did with those couple punches that hit him hard and be able to avoid those like he did the rest of the fight. Now, like I said, we had a great fight this past weekend with Gervonta Tank Davis, Floyd's boy. On Saturday, he beat Hugo Ruiz. He was supposed to fight Abner Maris. Now, what if I told you that I think that this guy, Tank, could dethrone the man that everyone thinks is the greatest boxer to ever live? And I'm talking Vasily Lomachenko. Coming up after the break, we'll get into that fight. We'll break it down, and I'll tell you why Gervonta is going to beat Lomachenko in a year or 2. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to The Squared Circle.
Messiness. It's inevitable. We're human. It's going to happen. Whether it be a tough shift at work or a slip up at the dinner table, our favorite clothes are bound to get dirty. Introducing Tide Pods Plus Febreze. The beautiful scent of Febreze combined with the cleaning power of Tide. And if you send us a video of you completing the Tide Pod Challenge, we'll send you free Tide Pods. Cut. Nope, we're definitely not doing that. Tide Pods. Send us your clips back. No.
Welcome back to The Squared Circle. We're going to talk a little Gervonta Davis versus Hugo Ruiz, which took place last weekend in a fight where Ruiz actually stepped in to replace the injured Abner Maris, who Tank was originally planned to fight, and that would have been a very exciting fight. People were very excited for that because Maris is an experienced veteran who is still in his prime, and while he's not as talented as Tank, he certainly has the record, experience, and pedigree to really test Tank, and that's really what we all wanted to see. Now, Tank's 22-0 with 21 knockouts after he knocked out Ruiz in the first round in a fight that was pretty much what we expected. Ruiz stepped in 2 weeks before the fight because Maris broke his orbital bone in training right before the fight, and so it wasn't really Tank's fault that he had to fight a guy that had no experience with him, no business being in the ring with him. It was just more of unfortunate circumstances that we didn't get to see Davis and Mares, which is sad. And Tank's last fight against Cellular was actually the same thing. He stepped in and replaced an injured Leo Santa Cruz, and Tank knocked him out in the third round. But, I mean, if you look at Tank's last 5 fights, 6 fights, actually his last 8 fights, he's knocked everyone out. And while he hasn't fought any top guys, he's young. He's 21 years old, and he fought Pedraza, knocked him out in the 7th round. Now, Pedraza, which is really his biggest win, Pedraza lost to Lomachenko in a decision. And Lomachenko is obviously the king of the 130-pound division, the king of anywhere from 126 to 135, really. And Gervonta's kind of the only guy that people think has a chance to even beat him. And so him knocking out Pedraza and Pedraza taking Lomachenko the distance kind of helps the narrative for that fight as well. And Lomachenko and Davis Lomachenko tried to make the Gervonta fight happen. Gervonta, who's a member of TMT, which is owned by Floyd Mayweather, he's Floyd's newest and brightest prodigy for sure. And I mean, it started with Adrian Broner. Floyd took him under his wing. That didn't work out. There's a guy named Devin Haney, who's also pretty young, younger than Tank, and a little lighter, that Floyd recognizes as a future world champion. He's a TMT guy as well. He's undefeated, but Floyd really took a liking to Gervonta early on and has stuck with him throughout his career. They've had some disputes on and off about inactivity, but as a whole, it seems like the relationship's pretty solid, and I've seen them training together and whatnot. So when Lomachenko tried to make that fight happen with Gervonta, Floyd kind of stepped in and said he's not ready yet. And I think he did that for the betterment of Tank's career, because that fight is going to happen, and that fight's going to be marketable for 4 or 5 years because they're both young. And Lomachenko's not young, but he's doesn't have much of a record in the pro division. So that fight's going to be marketable for a couple years to come, and I think that's what Floyd recognizes and didn't want. What happened to him and Canelo, what happened to Canelo when Canelo fought Floyd so young, and it kind of didn't ruin his career, but he took a big loss for it because he wasn't ready against Floyd. I think that's what Floyd was fearing would happen to Gervonta if he fought Lomachenko, and frankly, he's right. So we've seen Gervonta fight Liam Walsh, who was an undefeated British champion, knocked him out in the 3rd round. He knocked Francisco Fonseca out in the 8th round. So Tank's done all he's need to do in every fight that he's been asked, and he hasn't got to fight some of the top guys, even though they've been worked because of injuries and unfortunate circumstances that aren't his fault and are out of his control. But he is a guy who is an animal. He's very short, but he is so powerful, and he's very smart too. He's been boxing for a while. He's out of Baltimore, and lived a hard life and turned to boxing and is pretty crazy talented. Now, I think that they're going to make the Lomachenko fight happen, but I don't think that it'll be Tank's next fight, and I think that's smart. Floyd is pretty much making all the decisions for Gervonta, because if it was Gervonta's choice, he'd be fighting Lomachenko 2 fights ago. Gervonta wants to fight everyone, and he, a lot like Floyd when he was younger, is very cocky and very demonstrative in how good he is, and likes to talk about himself, and likes all the big shiny chains and gold watches, and that's all good and well because he backs it up, but Floyd's the one making the decisions on who he fights next, and I think they want to see him fight a guy like Abner Maris, like a guy like Leo Santa Cruz, before they put him in with Lomachenko. They need to get him into a fight where he is going to be far less experienced against a pretty talented and world champion before they put him up in the biggest fight of his career so young. And he's so talented. He's ready for it talent-wise. I mean, you can even argue that he's ready for it experience-wise. If they fought right now, you'd have to give the slight edge to Lomachenko based only off of experience and how much he knows and how good his footwork is. moving around people, but Gervonta definitely has the power to knock him out, the power to hurt him, the skill to outpoint him as well. I just think that he needs one big fight to season him up better so that he can really go into that fight confident. I mean, he's going to go into it confident either way, but fighting a guy like Lomachenko is something that you can't really duplicate. He's just so good, so experienced, and so tactical that it's just you need to get Tank out of these fights where he's only fighting 1, 3, 8 rounds, getting knockouts every time against guys who can't hurt him and aren't even close to having the talent that he has. So I think they'll be looking for a fight with Morris. I wouldn't be surprised if that fight just gets rescheduled. It seemed like those two really wanted to fight, and it'd be a really good fight because Morris is a bit bigger, and it'd be interesting to see how Tank does against him. Now, if that fight happens and he finishes him, then I really think that the talk for Lomachenko will be too heavy to deny. It's a good fight for both parties. Floyd's pretty good at making deals with any promoter, and that's Top Rank and ESPN, who owns the rights to Lomachenko. So I think there's a good fight, a good chance we see that fight get made out between promoters and between fighters, and it's a fight I really want to see. I've mentioned that Lomachenko's not my favorite fighter not because of him, but because of the popularity that surrounds him and the way the analysts just love him and think that he's the greatest fighter ever. And he is. He's an amazing fighter. There's no doubt about that. If you watch him, you can't question that. But I really like Tank. I really like watching him fight. He's a killer. He's a young killer, and like his story, he's a good dude. So I really want to see that fight, and I'll be rooting for Tank. And if that fight happens in the timeline that I expect, 1 to 2, 2 to 3 years from now, I really think that Tank has a really good chance of beating Lomachenko and really flipping the boxing world on its head. So that'd be something that I want to see. I think that Tank has an opportunity of a lifetime, that he has the opportunity to dethrone not only someone in his division that's, the best right now, but also that people are saying is the best ever. And for Tank, fighting at 130 pounds is tough because it's not a really marketable weight division for boxing fans. I mean, most people like the heavier guys, the bigger guys, the middleweights, the light heavyweights, the heavyweights. Those are what usually catches more of the casual fans. But him fighting Lomachenko is an opportunity because everyone knows Lomachenko's name. And if he fights Lomachenko, let alone beats Lomachenko, that makes him the most marketable guy in the sport as well. And that's exactly what Tank wants. That's exactly what Floyd wants. And that's the exact opportunity that's at hand. So I just really want to see that fight. I think you have to they're both southpaws, so it'll be interesting. But I really would venture to say that Tank's power, his precision would be a problem for Lomachenko. And I would say that Gervonta has a really good chance to come out on top if he fights his fight and doesn't get sucked up in what Lomachenko does and fight a different fight. So that's really all we got for this past weekends of fights. There wasn't really much to say about the Gervonta fight. He knocked him out in 1 round, 1 solid punch, and wasn't his fault that it wasn't a good card. It wasn't his fault that he had to fight a replacement. That's just the way boxing works sometimes. That's the name of the game. But it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of this, how soon Tank fights again. I know Lomachenko is supposed to fight in 4 months, and so it'll be interesting to see the talk towards the end of the year about where that Lomachenko-Davis fight stands, because the Lomachenko side knows as well that that's the biggest fight that can happen. So I think they'll make a way or find a way to make that happen, and it'll probably be the best boxing match of either 2019 or 2020. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be talking about some more determined future bouts that will be coming up. Stay right here on the Squared Circle. You're listening to mavradio.fm.
Tired of being a gentleman and treating gas with the respect they deserve? Well, now you don't have to. Tool Body Spray. With just one spray, you can completely transform yourself from a respectable, well-mannered man into the biggest douche around. Yeah, man! Opening car doors, buying flowers, romantic dinners in the park while the sun begins to set. What a bunch of bull. Tool body spray. Treat others the way you wouldn't want to be treated.
Welcome back. This is the Squared Circle. Now, the next segment we have for you is breaking down some future fights that I'm really excited about. Now, this first one, I think it's the best fight of the year so far. Errol Spence Jr. versus Mikey Garcia for the IBF welterweight title. Now, Spence is 24-0, 20 knockouts. He's one of the kings of the 147-pound division, but he's also the youngest dude, 24 years old. His biggest fight, he beat Kell Brook, who was 36-1 coming into that fight. Pretty good fighter. He broke his orbital bone. Kell Brook, his only loss was to Triple G. I mean, he's an animal. Spence is Pierce love him because he digs to the body. He doesn't just punch to the body. He digs to the body. He puts in body work on people. Loves to throw that jab to the head and a left hand to the body right in the solar plex. Takes the air out of people. He's a bad man, and he's talked a lot of smack to Terrence Crawford. They've gone back and forth, and I really hope a fight with them happens. Although it's going to be tough because one of the ugly parts about boxing is Terrence Crawford is promoted by Top Rank Boxing, which is Bob Arum, and Errol Spence is promoted by PBC. They fight on different channels, which means that coming to agree to terms with that fight, there's no way one promoter would let it be on a different channel and lose all that revenue. So it doesn't seem likely, but if it could happen, it's one of the fights we'd love to see. But Spence is fighting Mikey Garcia, who is 39-0, 30 knockouts. The only thing is that Garcia is a smaller dude. Garcia fought at 135 pounds, 140 pounds. This will be his first fight ever at 147. Spence is a big dude. They had a press conference the other week. You saw them together. Spence towers above him. Mikey Garcia is no joke, though. He's a top 10 pound-for-pound guy, just like Errol Spence is. In fact, I think Mikey Garcia is higher on the Ring Magazine's list. Garcia's beat Broner, which isn't saying much. Beat Robert Easter Jr., knocked him down. Beat Orlando Salido, who beat Lomachenko in his third professional fight. He beat Sergey Lipinets. But he's been knocked down a couple times at 135 and 140 pounds by Roman Martinez, and Lipinets also knocked him down too with a shot. But Mikey Garcia is no joke. He's really technical, just like Spence is, but he's an orthodox, so it's going to be orthodox versus southpaw. It's a big fight. It's one of the fights that Mikey Garcia called Spence out, said, I want to fight the best at 147. It was one of the few times where people call each other out, they make it happen. They made it happen. Errol Spence is a guy who, like I said previously, he's called out Keith Thurman, wants to fight the best. He believes he is the best. He's a Texas boy. He's a bad man. Now, this fight is a really good fight because these guys match up so well with each other. But there's just one thing about this fight that I can't get over and I can't overlook. As much as I want to, as much as I want to be in this fight, I am into the fight. But as much as I want to think that Mikey Garcia has a chance, the fact of the matter is he just doesn't. He's consistently fighting at 135. That's his best weight class. There's not a lot of guys to fight at 135, though. That's the problem. I respect him. I like him. I respect the crap out of him for coming up to 147 and basically being willing to fight a bigger guy and get his brains beat in just because there's no one to fight at 135 for him anymore. He's beat everyone there. And he's 39-0 for a reason, 30 knockouts. But Spence is 147 pounds. For you guys who don't quite understand how the weight classes work, let me break it down for you. Now, when they weigh in, they will both have to weigh in at 147. Spence has done that his whole career, no problem doing it. He's a big guy. He could fight at 154 if he wanted to. He probably will later in his career, but not anytime soon. Way too much at 147. But they weigh in the day before the fight at 147. After that, you can gain as much weight as you want. for the fight. So Spence will probably come in at around 155 to 160 pounds. Garcia won't get above 147. If he does, he'll be 150 tops. I mean, he's just not built for it. He's not big enough. He's never done that before. So when you're fighting a guy in peak shape at 10 pounds heavier than you and inches taller, it's just not a good matchup. Garcia's going to come into that fight the smaller guy, which he could do with a lot of fighters, but not Errol Spence. I mean, Errol Spence is going to dig to the body. They're both really technical guys. It'll be a fun fight to watch with technicalities involved. But technique-wise, they're equal, but Spence is just the bigger dude. So it's going to be tough. I mean, we've seen this before in the past play out, and it doesn't usually play out well. There's a couple fighters who can do it. Manny Pacquiao has moved up 8 divisions, been an 8-division world champion. But let me flash this back to Bernard Hopkins and Felix Trinidad. Now, Felix Trinidad, one of my favorite boxers of all time. The meanest left hook maybe ever. He cleaned out the welterweight division. Cleaned them out. Big names in there. Mosley, everyone. Defeated everyone. He went up to super welterweight, and then after some heckling and some racist comments by another one of my favorites, B-Hop, Bernard Hopkins, he decided to move up to middleweight to fight him. Now you have to remember that Felix Trinidad is a natural welterweight. Natural 147 pound. Ended up fighting B-Hop at 157, I believe, at a catchweight. Now, Bernard was the bigger man and beat him up. And Bernard, while a technician and the executioner he was, I think pound for pound, and that's why we have pound for pound rankings, Trinidad was the better fighter. But Bernard won that fight, all 12 rounds, ended up knocking out Felix in the 12th. And I kind of think that's what's going to happen with Spence and Garcia. Pound for pound, if Spence went down to Garcia, it'd be a different story. I'm not saying that Garcia would win. I'm just saying it'd be a great fight. And while there still might be a great fight, Spence too big, too strong for Garcia. I think Spence is going to take it over. I see the fight. I think the first couple rounds, you'll really just get to see they'll feel out each other. They're both smart, excellent boxers. I think the middle rounds, you'll start seeing that body work that Spence does start paying off on Garcia. I think he'll tag him, knock him down, maybe the 5th or the 6th, and I think this fight, if it goes all 12 rounds, I'll be impressed. I'll be really impressed with Garcia. But I think Spence knocks him out somewhere between the 9th and 10th rounds. Now, if this fight does go the distance, I think that's good news for Terrence Crawford. For those who don't know the 147-pound division, there's 5 absolute canine dog animals up there that are savages. If I had to rank them, I'm biased, like I said, but I'll put Bud Crawford at 1. Bud's another guy who fought at 135, 130, 135, 140. Now he's moved up to 147. But he's shown he can compete there. And the reason he doesn't scare me like Garcia coming up is because I've seen Bud in person many times, and I know how much he weighs when he's not fighting. He's gone up to 180 pounds. Kind of walks around at 180 right now. And he's fought at 2 fights at 147. He's got a big fight with Amir Khan coming up at 147. But he's shown that power is not a problem. His chin's not a problem. He's a next generation Floyd Mayweather. He can fight with both hands. I think he just brings a lot more to the table, and I think he's better equipped to fight at that heavier division. I think 147 is a good weight for him. I don't think it's too big at all. But if this fight goes a distance, I think people, right now the narrative is that Spence can beat anyone. And a lot of people think that. And they might not be wrong. Spence is an animal. But Crawford at 147 against Spence, probably the best fight in boxing right now. Probably won't happen for the next 2 to 3 years until there might not be anything else or promoters lose some of their pride and make that fight want to happen for boxing fans, which we don't see happen. But I think the narrative right now is that Spence would beat Crawford. Now, if this fight goes the distance and Crawford knocks out Khan, which I think he will, but we'll get into that in the next segment of this podcast, I think that the narrative could switch a little bit and people could be more inclined to think that Bud Crawford can beat Spence, which I don't think makes Spence happy, and I think makes him want to fight Crawford even more. Because I know in Spence's mind, he doesn't even just like to hear he's the best, says he's the best. He knows he's the best. He thinks he's the best, and in his mind, he knows it. So seeing that narrative switch on him might make that fight happen or make it more likely to happen. But like I said, I'm intrigued for this fight. I can't wait to watch it. I love Mikey Garcia. I have a lot of respect for Errol Spence. I just don't think it's a smart decision by Mikey to lose his undefeated record to come up here and do this. I'd rather him drop down to 130 and fight Lomachenko, because we saw Lomachenko has trouble with those bigger guys. And I think this is the perfect time to fight Lomachenko post-labrum surgery. I think that's a fight that he can win and is less scary for him than Errol Spence. But I respect the hell out of him for going up to 147 and doing this. And if he somehow wins, if he somehow wins, then the 147-pound division just gets even scarier. That's a big if. I don't think it happens. Next fight we're going to talk about is Canelo Alvarez, Saul Canelo, versus Daniel Jacobs. This fight is happening mid-April. Now, Canelo, he's pretty high on everyone's pound-for-pound list. 51-1-2. He's pretty well known for his fights with Triple G. Both wars. No knockdowns, but it's not indicative of how the fight went. I mean, they both were landing some monster shots. Triple G has a granite chin. So does Canelo. First fight with Triple G was a draw. I had Canelo winning on points. Triple G pressured him the whole time. Canelo can fight on his back foot. He can fight going forward. He's a complete fighter. He might be the most complete fighter in boxing. Ended up beating Triple G the second time in a fight that was a lot similar to the first, except you did see Canelo pressure him a little more. But I think most of that fight we saw that Triple G has made a career off of fighting guys that really don't have a big name, and he's knocked almost everyone out doing so. But he hasn't fought a lot of big guys, and a lot of people have ducked him. But I actually thought that Triple G, who fought a really close fight with Daniel Jacobs, which makes this fight all the more intriguing because that's who Canelo's fighting now. I actually thought Daniel Jacobs won that fight against Triple G. Triple G, that was when he was the number one pound-for-pound fighter on everyone's list, except mine, because I don't agree with a lot of boxing purists. I don't fall into the narrative that ESPN and all these boxing promoters make. But that was a close fight. And Triple G is no joke. I don't hate him. I just don't think he's as good as what everyone thought. I thought Canelo beat him both times. They're both great fights, and it showed that when Canelo gets and sticks to a game plan, he's almost unbeatable. Because he can fight on his back foot. He can come at you. His defense is unbelievable. He's got knockout power. He knocked out Rocky Fielding in his last fight, who's 6 inches taller than him. Broke him down. Chopped him like a tree. Had a knockout of the year in 2015, I believe, over Amir Khan. It was a glass chin. Knocked out James Kirkland. Dominating fashion. He's got decision wins. He's got probably the best resume in boxing right now. Listen to this. He's got decision wins over Sugar Shane Mosley, Miguel Cotto, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., and Erislandy Lara. Mosley and Cotto are two of the great fighters of the 2000s, and while they both were out of their prime, yes, still, to beat them is impressive. And it's not Canelo's fault he fought them out of their primes. Canelo was just young, and that's when the fight happened. His only loss, like I said, he's 51-1-2. His only loss came to Floyd Mayweather when he was 22. Fought him down in Mexico, 22 years old. Canelo's probably the biggest prospect to come since the 2000s. 22. I would never put a 22-year-old in the ring with Floyd Mayweather, especially because Floyd was in his prime. It's silly. Canelo barely landed a punch. I think he landed less than 15% of his punches. I mean, it was embarrassing. Floyd just embarrassed him. Didn't really hurt him. Tagged him with a couple good shots here and there, like Floyd always does. But anything Canelo threw didn't even come close to touching Floyd. Wasn't a close fight. He got embarrassed. But he became such a better fighter after that. It was the best thing that happened to his career. And while he's been calling out Floyd for years after, because I think a lot of people know that if they fought now, Canelo wins that fight, and not because he's better than Floyd ever was, but because Floyd's so old. If they fought in their primes, I'm taking Floyd all day long. That's just how good Floyd is. But if they fought now with Floyd's age, Canelo's a smart enough fighter now to beat him, because what he learned from that fight is how to fight smart like Floyd did and really become a complete fighter. Now, Daniel Jacobs is 35-2. When he faces Canelo, it's going to be the biggest fight of his career, and he lost to Triple G in a unanimous decision. Like I said, I thought Daniel Jacobs won. Nonetheless, it was an impressive performance, because Triple G has been knocking everyone out before that, and he didn't end up knocking Daniel Jacobs out. He's knocked out Sergio Mora twice, and he's got decision wins over Sergey Derevyachenko and Luis Arias. Both impressive wins. Daniel Jacobs is a good fighter. Now, the interesting thing about this fight is that I don't think it's close in the sense that Canelo's a better fighter. Canelo has more knockout power. Canelo should knock Daniel Jacobs out or win a unanimous decision. In fact, I'm taking a unanimous decision in this fight because I think that I was talking to a good friend of mine, Tony Boone. He's a writer for the World Herald. He's covered Bud Crawford since he was a Golden Gloves prospect, big boxing fan. He's been watching boxing for 30 years plus, knows his stuff, and he brought up a good point about Canelo, and he said Canelo's work rate has been unbelievable, and the fights that he's had his resume's crazy. Now it's a question of, when is that going to take its toll? When are we as viewers going to see that take its toll? And that is a really good point, because when you fought Triple G twice in wars, Amir Khan, James Kirkland, Shane Mosley, Miguel Cotto, at some point that has to catch up with you. At some point you got to wonder if that wear and tear is too much. And I don't know if it's going to come in the form of a loss at some point, a weird loss, where this could happen in this fight, or if Canelo is just immune to that and will always be the Canelo we thought. But when you have a resume like that, you've seen a lot of fighters that it catches up to them and they end up losing a fight that they shouldn't have because of the fights they've had before. I mean, they carry with you. So it's an interesting fight. It'll be really, really interesting to see what kind of Canelo we see post Triple G, because he beat Triple G, but anytime you fight Triple G, especially twice, it takes a lot out of you. And Canelo fights a lot. He's not a guy that fights once a year now. I mean, he fought Triple G once a year, but he fights every 6 months. So at some point you're going to expect that's going to catch up with him. And Daniel Jacobs is no joke at all. He's 35-2. I mean, close fight with Triple G. He's knocked a lot of people out. Could be interesting. I don't think that we're going to see that from Canelo right now. I think we're going to see the same Canelo, and I think he's going to be relieved to not fight Triple G. I don't think he's going to overlook Daniel Jacobs. I think it's a fight that is close for the first 4 rounds, and Canelo takes over and gets a decision win or a late stoppage. But it's an interesting fight because you want to see what kind of Canelo we're going to see and how much more of the prime Canelo are we going to see before we start seeing him tail off and start to edge out of his prime. So that's a fight I'm really excited for. That's coming up in mid-April. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back to talk a little division, pound for pound. Coming up next, we got Crawford and Khan. We got more for you. You're listening to The Squared Circle.
I'm just an ordinary witch. I go out every morning, go to work. And when I fly back home, my black cat has left hair everywhere. But it's okay, I know what to do. I use Swiffer. Fly with it, clean with it. If you've got a life, you've got a Swiffer.
Welcome back to the Squared Circle. We're going to be switching it up a bit, talking about a couple future bouts that I'm really excited for. First one we're going to talk about is actually coming up this weekend, February 16th, Saturday, and that's Errol Spence Jr. versus Mikey Garcia for the IBF welterweight title. Now, Errol Spence is 24-0, 20 knockouts. He's one of the next big things. He's a big young guy in that 147-pound division. You've heard me talk about him a little bit here on the podcast. I'll get in more of a breakdown of what he brings to the table. He beat Kell Brook, who was 36-1 coming into that fight. That was Spence's really first and his biggest fight. He ended up, it was a really good fight for 10, 11 rounds, and then he ended up tagging Kell Brook, and he ended up breaking his orbital, forced Brook to stop the fight. Brook's only loss was to Triple G, and so that if that tells you anything, he also beat Sean Porter, who holds a belt at that 147-pound division. So he's already beat one of those guys. So it's a really big win for Spence. He was obviously really young when he was taking it. I think the odds were 50-50. A lot of people were on Kell Brook. Kell Brook is a really good fighter, really technical. And Spence worked him a lot of the fight, really went to the body. And it's kind of when we saw what Errol Spence brings to the table, right? You see that his body work early in the rounds shows up in the later rounds. And that's really what happened. I mean, Kell Brook, it was a really good fight for the first six, 7 rounds. You could argue that Kell Brook was winning that fight, or it was very even at the very least. And then you saw a tale of two fights as it turned into round 8. You saw Errol Spence really take over. That body work slowed Kell Brook down. And then Errol Spence just got to be the assassin that he is. And so it was a really big win for Errol Spence. He was young at the time, but it kind of just showed how good of a boxer he is and how much promise he really has as a fighter. Spence has also beat Lamont Peterson, corner stoppage in the 7th round. His last fight was a 1-round fight against Carlos Ocampo. Ocampo was 22-0 before the fight. He was a pretty big prospect. Spence got a fight in his hometown of Dallas, Texas, in AT&T Stadium, Jerry World, and he knocked him out in the first round. So there's a lot of hype around Errol Spence right now, and rightfully so. I mean, the dude's a really good fighter, but he's taken a step up in experience and competition as well in fighting Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia is 39-0, 30 knockouts. But the caveat with Garcia is that he's mostly been a 135, 140-pound fighter. He held all the belts there for a while. There was really no one left to fight. He wiped them all out, wiped that division clean. He's beat Adrian Broner, Robert Easter Jr., both by decision. Orlando Salido, who beat Lomachenko in his 3rd fight. He stopped Salido. He beat Sergey Lipinets a couple fights ago in a weight class at 140. That was big for him. He did get knocked down by that, but other than that, he really controlled that whole entire fight. Knocked down by Roman Martinez as well. So Garcia's been great, but he has shown that he can be put to the canvas. And I think the interesting thing is when we saw him go up to 140 and fight Lipinets, he won that fight. He won it convincingly, but Lipinets is not the fighter that Spence was. And if Lipinets hurt him at 140, that might be a tall tale of what Errol Spence can do at 147. A lot of times you see these guys go up in weight, their chin doesn't hold up as it would at the weight division that they've been fighting at, or that they're normally fighting at, that they should be fighting at. And for Mikey Garcia, he is a 135-pounder. He's not a 147-pound guy. So that's something that is really what most people are wanting to see going into this fight. It's his first fight at 147. I think that he definitely has the experience advantage against Errol Spence. He's fought better guys. He's fought more high-profile guys. He has a lot more fights. He's a top 5 pound-per-pound guy. I mean, everyone really likes him. He's a Mexican fighter, Mexican-American, and he's really technical, great defense. Goes to the body well, too. I think that he's just has an all-around game. And I don't think that if he loses this fight, it'll be anything that he did wrong, more than just it's not the weight class he should be fighting at. So it's interesting, and I'm really excited for it because this is Errol Spence's first real big fight against someone who has the same skill level as him. Because that's the whole thing with prospects, right? It's like we have prospects who have so much talent and so much promise, and maybe we see him with really good offense and really good defense, and that's Spence. We haven't really seen him tested yet. Kell Brook kind of tested him a little bit, but Kell Brook is not Mikey Garcia. Let me get that straight. Kell Brook is not Mikey Garcia. So Spence is going to be fighting someone who brings more experience in, is just as talented. The only thing that's different, the only thing that Spence lacks here is that war experience. Garcia's been in wars. He has a lot more rounds under his belt. But Spence definitely has the power advantage. He has the height advantage. He'll have the reach advantage. So it'll be a fight that Errol Spence should win. He should win convincingly. But it'll be interesting to see how he deals with someone who is just as talented as he is. I saw these guys match up at a press conference, and they'll have the weigh-ins on Friday. You'll be able to get to see what I saw at the press conference, which was the height difference. Garcia clearly looks up to Spence. Spence is a lot bigger dude. Looks like he's a lot more muscular, just thicker in general. So I see this fight going really just one way. I see Spence and Garcia both controlling the first 4 rounds. I think it could be pretty even, but I think that Spence will go to the body, break down his body, and then I think towards the later rounds you'll really see Mikey Garcia just not be able to handle the power that a top fighter at 147 pounds brings. And so I think that Spence will take this fight over. I think Spence will win in a late round stoppage or unanimous decision. But there's another thing I want to point out, and that's if he doesn't do as well as people are expecting against Mikey Garcia, that's good news for Bud Crawford, because right now the two biggest guys, that the fight everyone wants to see at 147 pounds, since Thurman is still injured, everyone knows, even though Sean Porter has a belt, he's not the same fighter that Errol Spence, Bud Crawford are. So everyone really wants to see Spence and Crawford right now. I think the narratives that Spence would beat Crawford, a lot of people seem to believe that. Crawford's moving up in weight too, but contrary to what Mikey Garcia is moving up, Bud's fought at 130, 135, 140, and now 147. But Bud's a bigger dude than Mikey Garcia. Bud walks around at 180. I've seen him many times. He's a bigger guy, and for him to cut down to 147, I think that's a good weight for him at this stage in his career. And plus, he's already had 3 fights there. You've seen 3 knockouts, 3 stoppages. I think people have seen that Crawford is a legit 147-pounder. It doesn't really take away from his power. He has the chin to handle it. He's never been knocked down at 147 pounds. So you haven't really seen any weakness there for Crawford. So that transition has been smooth. And I think that a good performance by Mikey Garcia, not necessarily a win, but maybe a split decision, even a unanimous decision that is closer than people imagined, is good for the narrative of Bud beating Spence. And I think that if that happens, it makes that fight more likely, because Spence right now, I don't think he's scared of Crawford. I don't think he's ducking him. I think that it's a deal with management. They're with different promoters. Bud's obviously with Top Rank and Bob Arum, and Errol Spence is with PBC. So they fight on different channels. Bud will always be on ESPN, and Errol Spence will always be on Fox Sports. So I think that there's too many logistics to be worked out for that fight to happen. And I think Spence wants it, but doesn't want to cross lines or lose money to fight him that bad right now. But if a not so great performance by him here happens, then I think that he's going to want to fight Bud more when he hears people saying that Bud can beat him. So I think that could be probably the best case scenario for Bud Crawford if Mikey Garcia has a really good performance. A lot of people have wanted to see Mikey Garcia and Terrence Crawford fight too. I don't think that fight would happen at anywhere other than 147 right now, because I don't think Bud's going to change up his training routine and drop more weight and go back down to a different division since he already cleaned out the one before. So I think that, I'm really excited for this fight. It's going to be interesting, but I think Spence takes it over. Garcia, I give him a ton of credit for moving up to 147 pounds. The dude has a lot of heart. I just don't see this going too well for him. I hope that after this fight he can drop down to 135 and have a tune-up fight, and then maybe drop down to 130 and fight Lomachenko, who I think he would have a better chance at winning at. All right, now we're going to break down a couple divisions for you in boxing. I've talked about the 147-pound division quite a bit. We're going to break that one down. Also break down the heavyweight division for you. And then last but not least, we have our pound-for-pound rankings. The 147-pound division, like I said, there's 4 belts: WBO, WBA, WBC, and the IBF. Now, Sean Porter has one of them. He's fighting a guy named Yordani Ugas here in a couple months. Shouldn't be much of a fight. Porter has had some great fights. He had a fight against Thurman, Danny Garcia, lost against Thurman, beat Garcia in a brawl that was really, you can't really call it a boxing match. It was really just a brawl. Brawled Garcia the whole time, like Porter always does. And Garcia couldn't handle that, couldn't tame it, couldn't score enough to win that fight. So Porter has a belt. Garcia, who's coming off a loss and then a loss against Thurman as well, really needs to turn his career around because he's a young guy. He's not old, super talented. A lot of people kind of figured that he'd have a couple belts right now. He's fighting Adrian Granados in what is a tune-up fight. No other way to call it. He'll win that fight. He'll probably knock him out, and he'll set him up for another big fight coming up with one of these other guys. Spence has a fight, like I said, against Garcia. He has the IBF belt. And then later on, we have Khan versus Crawford in April 20th. Crawford has a belt in that division as well. Thurman, who held 2 belts, obviously won his last fight against Josito Lopez. He might fight Pacquiao. Pacquiao's also in that division. So taking Thurman and Pacquiao out of the rankings of 147-pound right now because of their inactivity and because they're not there yet. They're not the prime fighter, that they're not what they want to be at this stage yet. They still have a couple fights to prove that. You got Porter. Porter's coming in at the number 4 spot for sure. Although he has a belt, if he fought Spence has the smarts and the talent and the defense to keep him off of him, score, and easily win that fight. Danny Garcia, while he's more talented than Porter, couldn't beat Porter, but I think he has a better chance of beating Spencer Crawford than Porter would because of the way he fights. I'm obviously putting Errol Spence at number 2 and Crawford at number 1. I don't know if that fight will happen. I don't know when that fight will happen. I think the fight more likely to happen is Crawford and Garcia. Now, these two are around the same age. They came up in the Golden Gloves the same time, amateurs. They actually fought each other. Tony Boone, who I previously mentioned, actually was in Florida when Crawford was fighting Garcia in the amateurs. He saw that fight. I've heard a lot about this fight. Garcia talks about it when he was taking shots at Bud on Twitter, and Bud piped back. Garcia won the amateur bout against Crawford, but for those who don't know, amateur is scored by who lands the most punches per round. And Crawford wasn't the kind of fighter he is now. He also isn't a guy who's going to be throwing as many punches as possible just to try and win an amateur bout. from everything I've heard and from all the people I've talked to, amateur fights are 3 rounds. It sounds like Garcia won the first. You can give him the first. And after that first round, it was all Bud Crawford. I've talked to 3 or 4 different people that say the exact same thing. And they ended up giving the fight to Garcia. So obviously Garcia's telling Crawford, like, I'll beat you just like I did in the amateurs. And Crawford was like, you didn't beat me and you know it. I was controlling that. Like, you'd get whooped even more now. So there's been a lot of talk between those two. I think that that's a pretty marketable fight. I think it's something that can happen. And I'd love to see after Crawford fights Khan and hopefully beats Khan and Danny Garcia wins his tune-up fight. I think that matches up well for a late 2019 fight between those two way before we get into Spence Crawford. So that's a fight I really want to see and I think can happen, and it'll be a really good fight because Garcia is the naturally not bigger guy, but he's been at 147 longer. Bud's coming up. He's had some experience at 147, but Garcia definitely presents some problems for Crawford. He would be the best fighter that he's fought. I think you could say that Khan is better than Garcia talent-wise, but Danny Garcia has a good chin, and the one knock on Khan and the only reason he has as many losses as he does is because he gets knocked out all the time. They call him glass chin because anything that touches him on his chin might knock him out. He's never really been outboxed, but he's found a way to lose a lot of fights and get knocked out a lot. So I think a lot of people are expecting Crawford to knock Khan out or at least really hurt him and win that fight. So I'd really love to see a Danny Garcia-Crawford fight before I see Crawford and Spence, and I think that's more likely as well. But that division is stacked. I mean, top to bottom, even the guy who's not on the top 4 of my top 4, Keith Thurman, held 2 belts at one time, and 2 years ago I would say that he'd beat any of those guys in the division. So I think that I'm hoping we see the Thurman of old and that he can fight one of those guys and be back to who he was, and I think if that happens, he'll win that fight. Now, the heavyweight division is really fun. It's pretty much a 3-man race with Fury, Wilder, and Anthony Joshua. We've already talked about Fury and Wilder. They're fighting again here in 2019, probably in around September, I'm assuming. I think most of the rumors are saying around September. And so the winner of that fight will obviously go ahead of the other person in the terms of rankings. Now, I think Fury wins that fight. If Wilder wins, I think that there's a good chance that he fights Joshua. I think that I love Joshua. He's very good. He's so talented. He's the best fighter in that division, bar none. He's number 1. He's better than Fury and Wilder. But he's not fighting great competition and hasn't been for a while. And a lot of times when you see that complacency starts to take effect, and that's what we've seen with Joshua. He hasn't had real great performances his last 2 or 3 fights, and that's fighting guys like Big Baby Miller, Anthony Yarde, not guys that should be even. I'm not saying they shouldn't be in the ring with him because they're both decent heavyweights, but they're guys that Joshua should put away easily, and he hasn't been. So Joshua's going to have to fight Fury or Wilder at some point. Everyone knows that. His promoter, Eddie Hearn, knows that because he needs those belts. He does. And so that'll be interesting because Fury and Wilder both have fought that competition. I think Fury is more equipped to beat Joshua than Wilder is. Anthony Joshua might just be a better Fury, not as fast but more powerful, really good technical fighter, but Fury might be able to beat Joshua because Wilder is not going to be able to do what he does to everyone else, just like he couldn't do to Fury for 8 rounds, 9 rounds. He won't be able to do that to Joshua at all, and Joshua actually has the power to knock out Wilder for sure. So Joshua is the king of that division right now. He needs to lay down his pride and fight one of these guys. No matter how much money he makes, he's trying to play like Floyd Mayweather and get like 80% of the purse, and that's just not fair to Fury or Wilder. They're both big names and big markets. It'd be a mega fight because Joshua would sell out the UK, Wilder would sell out the US, and if it's Fury and Joshua, then it's the battle of the Brits, and they're both marketable either way, and both guys are going to make a ton of money. So that fight just needs to happen, plain and simple. Now, before we wrap up this week's episode of the Squared Circle, I'm giving you guys my top 5, actually top 6 pound-for-pound fighters right now. Now, we'll start it off with number 6, and that's Errol Spence, and that's because of his talent, what I've seen from him, and the promise he has. Already has a belt at the best weight division in boxing. He's got a great win over Kell Brook, and he stopped a really good prospect in the first round. He'll climb this list if and when he beats Mikey Garcia, and I think that he has a lot of promise. He's really young, and really he has no weakness that I've seen so far. Number 5 is a guy that we haven't talked about on this podcast yet, and that's Alexander Usyk. Now, he's a cruiserweight. He held all 4 belts, and he plans to move up to heavyweight. Now, it's interesting because he reminds me of an Evander Holyfield in the sense that he's going to be fighting at heavyweight and isn't a true heavyweight, and that's tough. And Holyfield might have been the best boxer in his era, but the reason he lost some of those fights is because he wasn't as big as they were, and he wasn't a natural heavyweight. And that's kind of what we're going to see with Usyk. He's used to fighting at 205, and now he's going to be moving up to heavyweight with Fury, Wilder, and Joshua. And while he's just as good technically as all of them and has as much power pound for pound, he's not going to have the same power that they have when they're 20, 30, even 50 pounds heavier than what he is, and a lot taller. So it's going to be tough for him to break into the heavyweight division, but that doesn't take away from his pound for pound ranking and how dominant he has been at cruiserweight. The dude's undefeated. He just knocked out Tony Bellew. He's a really good fighter, Ukrainian, so there's not a big market in the U.S. for him. Not extremely well known, but boxing purists and analysts across the globe know that Usyk is an unbelievable talent and a great boxer. At number 4, we've got a guy that I'm pretty sure most of you have never heard of, and that's Naoya Inoue. He's a Japanese boxer, a real light guy, around 122 pounds. Do me a favor and look up some videos of this guy. His knockouts are unbelievable. He knocks guys out with body shots all the time. He's so technical, has no weakness. His defense is unbelievable. He's undefeated. He's never even came close to losing a fight, and he knocks guys out quick. His power is crazy for 122 pounds. My biggest hope for this guy is that he can work his way up to 130 or 127 and fight Lomachenko. I think he beats Lomachenko straight up, and I've also said that about Guillermo Rigondeaux, which didn't happen. Maybe that's a little bit of animosity and haste towards the Lomachenko supporters and how much they praise him for how little he's done. But it's also just speaks to how good Inoue is, and he is just an unbelievable spectacle. I've never seen someone, I don't know if I've ever seen someone pound for pound as talented, technical, with so much power and speed as he has. He's so smart in the ring. He's just unbelievable to watch. I mean, the dude can't speak a lick of English, so I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. But watching his fights, they're quick. He's like, if you can picture a Mike Tyson at 122 pounds, that's Naoya Inoue for you. So I hope he gets into a big market fight where a lot of Americans can see him and a lot of people can see his greatness, because he is unbelievable. Now, number 3 on the list is the guy that I talk a lot of smack on, but I do respect him, and he's a great fighter, and that's Vasily Lomachenko. Now, he hasn't had many fights. He's 15-1, I believe. His only loss was to Orlando Salido, which I don't count against him because that was his 3rd professional fight, and it was a guy who's a Mexican in Salido and is just a really good fighter, and Lomachenko just wasn't ready for that. Now, Lomachenko's amateur record is 396-1. It's the best amateur record of all time. He is unbelievable. What he does in the ring is like practice to him. He knows everything. He's pulled out tricks that we've never seen. He does this thing when a guy's hurt where he'll take one hand, put it on his glove, and as he's moves his glove down, will punch right where he just moved it from. So blocking is almost just it doesn't work against Lomachenko. His footwork is unbelievable. A little story about Lomachenko. His dad put him in ballet when he was really young and didn't let him box until he was, I think, 12 years old, until he could learn the Ukrainian dance, which is a lot of ballet. And so his footwork is bar none. I don't think anybody has better footwork. The way he circles people is just unbelievable. Now he's fought at 125, 130, and he's a really good fighter. Probably the generation's most talented, if not the most talented ever. And it kills me to say that. It's why I kind of paused, because everyone is just falling in love with this guy. He's on ESPN. He's ESPN's big guy. And a lot of these analysts just kind of get taken away with how talented he is. Although he really just doesn't have a lot of those big fights. He's so small. There's not a lot of people out there for big fights that he can take. And so it's going to be really hard for him to cement his status as the greatest ever. But he is arguably the most talented ever, and that's for sure. So take away nothing from him. I respect him. He's a great fighter. Do I kind of want to see him get beat? Yeah, a little bit. But that's not anything, a knock on him, or just a knock on how I've seen people that I respect get blown away by him and taken away from some of the actual greats in what he can do. Number 2 on the list, Saul Canelo Alvarez. We've talked about Canelo a lot. There's not much to say. He's got a great record. He's fought some of the great names in boxing. He's just all-around great fighter. Pressure guys. He's a great defensive fighter. He's got great head movement. He goes to the body. He's got knockout reel highlights. He's just unbelievable. Number 1, the top spot, I'm sure, as you could guess. And yes, I'm from Omaha. Yes, I'm biased. And yes, I'm still going with Bud Terrence Crawford at number 1, because he's held belts at 135, 140, and now 147. That's 3 different weight classes and 3 tough weight classes to go up in. He hasn't seen a fight that he can't handle. The only fight people really thought he would lose, with 2 actually, was Yuriokas Gamboa, who did knock him down a couple times. Bud was really young when he fought that, and Bud ended up knocking him out. If you go back and watch that fight, Bud doesn't even look like the same fighter as he is now. But Gamboa was a Cuban guy who was a big prospect and a really good fighter. And for Bud to win that fight, it really put him on the map. And ever since then, he hasn't even found a fight that he's been close to losing. He fought Victor Postel, which a lot of people thought he was going to lose, and he dominated him pretty much every single round. There's not much you can really say about Bud other than everything he does is just unbelievable. He kind of looks like a young Floyd Mayweather, and I think that's what a lot of people have labeled him as. His defense is so good. But what's interesting about Bud is he can fight. He's a natural orthodox guy, but he boxed left-handed. But he also switches it up in fight. So he can fight with both hands, really switches it up. Can't really game plan around him. He's so technical. He's got such good power. He's so fast. His hands are so good. He's so balanced. He moves really well. I don't really see him losing a fight until he gets to Spence, and that'll be an interesting fight because Spence is so talented but so young as well. And Spence might be a little bigger than him, but Bud Crawford is unbelievable. I'm fortunate to be from Omaha. I'm fortunate to have been able to cover a couple of his fights and meet him a couple times, and he truly is a great in our generation, and he'll probably retire as one of the best ever. So it's been a pleasure. Listen, that's my top 5. Call it top 6 if you want, pound for pound. And that's all we got time for today on the Squared Circle. The next podcast we're going to talk about, I'm going to have Tony Boone, who I've talked about a little bit, one of my good friends, on. And we're going to discuss and go really in depth on Bud Crawford's next fight against Amir Khan. We're going to break that down April 20th. That's up in New York at Madison Square Garden. Tony's going to be there. He's going to give us a breakdown of what he thinks is going to happen, what the future holds for each guy if they win, and tell some good stories about Crawford. Like I said, he's been covering him for around 10, 15 years. So it's going to be a fun one. Listen, I want to thank you guys for listening to the Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing with me today. It's been fun. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Look forward to you guys watching that fight with Errol Spence and Mikey Garcia this weekend. Don't forget the Canelo and Daniel Jacobs one later on too. So thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. And as I leave, I want to leave you guys with the greatest boxing quote of all time. Listen up and enjoy. Thanks for listening to the Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing with me, Ray Koch.
My style is impetuous, my defense is impregnable, and I'm just ferocious. I want your heart, I want to eat his children. Praise be to Allah.
Thanks for listening to The Squared Circle, Jabbering Boxing with Ray Koch.